Welcome to The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullin, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In the podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put the stories together, offer additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. The catch-up is sponsored by Hutton Brickyards on the Hudson in Kingston. At Hutton Brickyards, every season brings a new way to dine. Edgewood Restaurant and Bar is now open for the season, offering refined fall and winter dining inside a beautifully restored Edgewood mansion and a delicious Sunday brunch that's not to be missed. For hours, menus, and reservations, visit huttonbrickyards.com. Edgewood Restaurant and Bar, part of the Hutton Brickyards experience, 132 Lindsley Avenue in Kingston. And Emily, you and I plan on going there for dinner very soon, which I'm looking forward to.
Can't wait.
So we'll be able to report back to listeners on what you expect will be a delicious meal. But right now we have more important news at hand. We're recording this on Wednesday morning, November 5th, and that means we are recording this after Election Day. So our show today is going to be all about the results from the local races.
Yes, it's a very exciting day, and I think an unexpected one in many respects, Walter. So we'll get into that.
Okay, Emily, let's catch up on election results. Emily, what was the overall takeaway last night?
So, Walter, Democrats in Dutchess County flipped control of the Dutchess County Legislature on Tuesday for the first time since 2008. Dutchess County has long been purple, supporting Democrats on the federal and state level and Republicans at the county level. The Dutchess legislature has been a GOP stronghold in recent years, as has been the office of the county executive. But in Tuesday's races, 11 of the 25 seats in the legislature were uncontested, and of those, Democrats held 6 and Republicans held 5. So we had 14 seats in play, and it's here that we see Democrats dominating. So let me tell you how that went down. So 5 incumbent Republicans lost their seats to Democratic challengers, while all the Democrats with challengers successfully defended their seats. Here are the ones who were ousted. So Robert Gorman in District 1, Ryan Travelpeace in District 2, Tony DeQuani in District 5, Lynn Real Versace in District 14, and Deirdre Houston in District 25. There were 3 open seats with no incumbents on the ballot, and those went to Republicans. In fact, one of those seats had belonged to Chairman Will Truitt in District 7, who I guess we can say can take solace in the knowledge that although he surrendered his seat to run for comptroller and gave up the chairmanship, did not contribute to his party's loss in the legislature. What is that going to mean? Well, when the smoke cleared, Democrats emerged with a 15-10 lead, and they now have decisive control of the legislature, a 60% majority. They are just shy of a supermajority, which would be 66% of the vote. But it seems unlikely that County Executive Sue Serino would veto legislation that has the support of 60% of the legislature. Now, let me give you some more context for that. In Dutchess County, 37% of the voters are Democrats, of the registered voters, and 27% are Republicans. Fully 29% are independents. In many of the races, we saw a 60-40 split in favor of Democrats, which means that we had crossover independents voting for Democrats and maybe even some Republicans, it's possible, to get to that kind of a number. So certainly independents flushed over to the Democratic ticket on this election day. Here we have Sue Serino discussing a backlash not just to Trump, but to divisive politics.
You could see the backlash of Trump, and people are angry. So they came out and they voted. And no matter I look at Will Truitt. He's a young man that works so hard, has his heart in the right place. But you were up against these odds that it was uphill battle.
And Michael McCormick, chair of the Dutchess County Republican Party, also weighed in.
It was an uphill battle for us just because of the national politics on the national level. And when you look at what we are as Republicans in Dutchess County, we're a purple county. On day one, we're down 18,000 votes countywide. So to overcome that delta is a very difficult thing to do for us as Republicans.
So why don't we move on and talk briefly about the Dutchess County judge race. But before we jump into the results, let's refresh listeners on why that race was so hot for so many voters.
Yes, and we saw the hotness of that race in some campaign signage that went up in the last few weeks with messages that said things like Dutchess County needs to be safe for women, make Dutchess County safe again for women. I saw signs like this around the county, dotted around in different places. So one of the issues, not the only issue, but one of the issues that animated this race surfaced the court case of Nicole Armando, a woman who was convicted of the killing of her partner, who she claimed had abused her sexually and emotionally for years, with whom she had 2 children. Now, that case was very interesting because in 2020, the incumbent, Ned McLaughlin, the incumbent judge, sentenced Nikki Armando to 19 years in prison. And that sentence verdict, was taken to the appellate court in New York State, and they bumped it down and said the sentence had been too harsh. They invoked a fairly new law, a domestic abuse survivors law, that gives judges the discretion to reduce the sentences that are on the books if that is an aggregating factor in the case. And it was, the appellate court ruled in this case. So Nikki Armando is now out of prison. Her sentence was commuted to, I think, just over 7 years. And that verdict and that case was on the minds of many voters as they went into the voting booth yesterday. So that's the backdrop. Then we have the decision that voters made yesterday, which was to turn out an incumbent and who had been on the bench for 10 years and replace him with a young, new political upstart, Tara Gerry. I'm sure folks saw her signs around the community. And she won just about 60% of the vote to the 40% for McLaughlin.
That's a pretty big win.
Handily defeating. And what's incredibly interesting as well about this is, for the first time in Dutchess County, where we have 2 Dutchess County judges, we will have an all-female bench. That's never happened before. We also caught up with Tara Gerry last night.
I think people were ready for a change on the bench. They want a judge that's going to be a voice of the community, someone that's going to listen to everybody that comes into the courtroom and treat everybody equally and with respect.
I'm so glad we were able to talk to Tara Gerry firsthand and see exactly how surprised she was by the race. Interesting. Let's move on and talk about the comptroller race.
Yes, and I think there too we should remind our listeners, to those who didn't turn into the podcast last week, just what the comptroller does, because there was discussion of that, and that became a very important issue in this race. The comptroller is a bit of a ombudsman or a watchdog for the county government. And in this case, we had Dan Aymar-Blair, an accountant who used to work for the New York City Board of Education, running against Will Truitt. Will Truitt is a Republican. He gave up his Dutchess County legislative seat to run in this election, to run for this office. And he's also the chairman of the legislature. So he gave up his chairmanship and his legislative seat to run, and he lost big. So this is a case as well where we will now see the impact of an independent comptroller. That was the platform on which Dan Aymar-Blair wrote. Now, most people don't necessarily care or pay attention or haven't to the reports that come out from Dan Aymar-Blair's office. But Dan Aymar-Blair used an interesting technique over the last year. He's only been in office for a year. And that was because he was filling out the unexpired term of a woman named Robin Lois, who went to Albany. He began using social media to communicate the results of his office's audits on county government. And that really apparently resonated with voters. And when we talk about what does a comptroller do, Will Truitt's idea was to say that he wants to support the county legislature. He wants to support county government. He wants to support Sue Serino. And that message apparently really did not stick with voters. They want divided government, as we know from the race we just discussed, the races with county legislature, and they apparently want an independent watchdog looking out over that county government. And that is why we saw, according to what voters told us at the polling booth, Dan Aymar-Blair significantly trouncing, really, Will Truitt at the ballot box. Dan Aymar-Blair spoke about the role the comptroller plays on Tuesday evening.
Experience and independence count, and that this office of the comptroller can actually be a real great tool to serve the people.
That was very interesting to hear firsthand from our Republican leaders. Have we covered everything at the county level? Should we transition over to our local races?
Yes, I think we could also talk about what went on at individual legislative races, but I'm going to direct people to read our coverage because otherwise, Walter, you and I are going to be on this call and on this podcast for way too long, and our readers and our listeners are going to get frustrated with us. So yes, let's talk about the local races.
So let's talk local. Should we start in Rhinebeck or Red Hook?
Let's start in Rhinebeck. We had a very interesting situation emerge, of which our Rhinebeck listeners will surely be aware, although maybe not. We heard yesterday at the polls from our listeners and our readers who talked to our reporter, Atheniano. Some of them were unaware of the write-in campaign. But last Sunday, a week ago Sunday, so about 10 to 12 days ago, a grassroots effort was mounted to put up Gerry Bassett, the mayor of the village of Rhinebeck, up against, for election, the incumbent Elizabeth Spinzia. And they were advocating a write-in campaign. It was too late to get on the ballot. Gerry Bassett didn't primary Elizabeth Spinzia. But in any event, Elizabeth Spinzia did hold her race. She did fend off this last-minute challenge. But what was very interesting that we saw is although she handily won her reelection, holding on to 3/4 of the vote with about 2,147 votes cast for her, there were 503 write-in votes. Now, the Dutchess County Board of Elections has not yet identified who those names are. That will be done in the coming days. But we have every reason to believe that the vast majority of those would have been for Gerry Bassett.
Let's just pause here for 1 minute, Emily, and go back. When you say it was a grassroots campaign to write in Gerry Bassett, it doesn't get much more grassroots than this. Let's just explain for listeners exactly what unfolded over that weekend.
Yeah. So what we mean by grassroots, Walter, I'm glad you asked, is that this was not an organized Democratic Party nomination. This was not a case where that person's name is on the ballot and got onto the ballot in the standard protocol methods, which are in our communities caucusing in Red Hook, which is now going to move to primary system, or primary system in Rhinebeck. There was no primary. There was no candidate who stepped forth to challenge Elizabeth Spinzia for her rerun for Rhinebeck town supervisor. So that's what we mean by grassroots. And it also took place right before the election. In fact, early voting had already commenced one day prior. On Sunday morning, those folks who live in Rhinebeck woke up to see signs. Some of them had pictures of a Bassett hound. Some of them had just pictures of Gerry Bassett's face himself saying, write in, we want change, write in Gerry Bassett's name on your ballot, which you can do on the front of the ballot. So that's how this took hold. Now, very soon thereafter, I think by Monday morning, many of these signs and flyers had been taken down. They were put in public places, on electric poles, and so forth. And the Democratic Party of Rhinebeck, feeling that this was an act of disloyalty and that it was inappropriate, went around and took the signs down. But we covered it. Other newspapers jumped on it after we covered it. So there were many opportunities for people to learn about and read about this grassroots effort.
And what do people think are the reasons behind this animosity toward Spinzia?
Well, there are some big issues that are animating that frustration. Of course, the Sixth Census Project is one of them. We've talked about that on earlier podcasts. Rhinebeck, the town board of Rhinebeck, has opted to sue the Sixth Census Project. Whether they will ultimately be determined to have standing to sue in that matter is not yet known. The Sixth Census Project is a conference center retreat project, resort project in Clinton with 8 acres in Hyde Park. It is not in the community of Rhinebeck. The Rhinebeck Chamber of Commerce very much wants to see that project come to fruition, but the town of Rhinebeck, the town board, does not. So that's one of the issues. Of late, we've been hearing concerns about the way the sale of the Linwood property out on River Road is being handled. That's a second issue. And then, of course, there's the discussion of a bed tax in Rhinebeck, which is something to which the Rhinebeck Area Chamber of Commerce is also opposed. So those issues really animated this sort of sudden surge of frustration. But it's been building for some time.
And we should make it clear that Gerry Bassett has gone on the record saying he had no knowledge of this write-in campaign and he had no involvement in it.
That's correct. I'm glad you raised that, Walter. That's very much the case. However, there are people in the Democratic Party in Rhinebeck who have filed a complaint with Michael Dupree, the Dutchess County Democratic Party chair, alleging acts of disloyalty by Gerry Bassett in not pushing and disavowing this race earlier on, or this effort, I should say, earlier on.
So just to recap, there were how many write-in votes in Rhinebeck last night?
There were 503 write-in votes, and Elizabeth Spinzia had 2,147 votes.
And when do we expect to know the names that were on those write-in votes?
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know how long it will take them to count. This is an unusual situation. I've never seen this in a local race since we've had the Daily Catch, so I don't know. I would think it would take about a week, but maybe we'll be surprised and it will be done quickly today.
So we'll keep our eyes on that.
Yeah.
Shall we jump over to Red Hook?
Yes. So Red Hook also a real new moment there. It's not really a story about Republicans and Democrats. It's a story about a new look for the town board. That race was really animated by the situation with the boat club, the Red Hook Boat Club, as our listeners will surely know from all the signage that's been out for the last 7 months or 6 months. The town board has made an appeal and has voted 3-2 to take the Red Hook Boat Club by eminent domain. And that has enraged and riled up a big swath of the community. And it inspired Christina Ducharme, a Democrat, and Ken Migliarelli, a farmer and an independent, to wage, starting in the spring of 2025, a campaign, initially to run as independents under the homegrown Red Hook banner, that's the name of their party, but also then to run as Democrats, even though Kenny is an independent, for the Democratic nomination. And they were successful. So they toppled longtime incumbent Christine Caine. She was not reelected at the caucus. And the other seat that was up is that seat occupied previously or currently, but will no longer, by Julia Solomon, who decided not to run for reelection. So Christina Ducharme and Kenny Migliarelli swept to victory, defeating David Mergendahl. I do want to note that Christina Ducharme was quite gracious last night in saying that she really understands why Mergendahl ran, and she hopes to reach out to him and really cohere his support as she and Kenny Migliorelli attempt to put a new face for now in the minority, but ultimately perhaps enticing another candidate to run in a couple of years, both for supervisor and for the two other seats on town board that will be available. So we have a new look to the town board starting January of 2026.
Let's pull the camera back just a little bit, Emily, because I think what you are saying about new look is very interesting. So there's a new look in Red Hook. There's a new look with the all-female bench at the county level. And if you look further south in New York City, there's very much a new look in New York City now with what happened there in the race for mayor. So is this new look sort of an overarching takeaway that we can take away from what happened last night?
I am reluctant to comment on races far afield, such as the race that catapulted Zohran Mamdani to the mayoralty in the city of New York. Of course, a very interesting race. I think different dynamics are happening there. But there's no question that underneath all of these races, there is a frustration with status quo. There is a frustration with the idea of enmity between parties, between people. All of the candidates who ran in Dutchess County last night talked about wanting to bring people together. They don't want to see people against one another. They want to see a coherence. They want to see a care for fellow neighbors. And this, to me, does grow very much out of what we are seeing out of Washington. So those themes, I think, echoed across every race up and down the ballot.
So the election may be over, but the Daily Catch is certainly going to be doing several follow-up stories. What specific stories can readers expect to see in the next week or two coming out of the election?
Yes. Well, I think the most important story that I hope we can get done in the next week or two is what does divided government at the county legislature, let me repeat that. What will this divided government in the Dutchess County Legislature with a Republican executive and a Democratic controlled legislature, what will that mean? What will that look like? How will that unfold? Whose agenda will take hold in Dutchess County? And although, as you know, Walter, we don't technically cover Dutchess County, we put a lot of effort into these county races. And I would encourage our readers who are interested, our listeners, to go back and read our coverage. It's very interesting. We have a drop down on our homepage, government, and then Dutchess or election 2025. I would encourage people to go back and listen. It's going to be and read. It's going to be a very interesting next year or so. Now, of course, of interest and of note is all of these candidates who just won their Dutchess County legislative races last night have to run again in a year because we're moving to even year elections. So this is just a 1-year run, but we'll see what happens a year from now.
I have to say it again, oi. So that's a whole nother thing. They all have to run again in a year?
Yes, that's right. Not all of the elected officials, but the Dutchess County legislature races, they all need to run again in a year.
So I think we've covered most of the hot topics, right?
We certainly have, and I'm very proud of our team. We were up late last night. We made sure that when our readers awoke this morning, they had full coverage. We had a reporter out in Rhinebeck yesterday, a reporter out in Red Hook yesterday, interviewing voters at the polls. So I think we have it's a very proud moment for the Daily Catch to show that we're out, we're covering our communities, and we're paying attention to races north, south, east, and west.
So let's close out our show with our usual question, and let's talk a little bit more about that. I think listeners sometimes like to know how we make the donuts. So talk a little bit more, tactically about how you and your team really reported everything last night. How does it work from an hour by hour process?
I'm glad you asked that, Walter. Thank you for that honor of being able to talk about that. So we made a plan about 2 weeks ago as to how we would deploy our resources. We had a photographer with Athen Janos yesterday afternoon. Actually, they began yesterday morning. So at 10:30 in the morning, they met in Rhinebeck to interview voters at Star Library, one of the two voting places in Rhinebeck, the other being Brookmead. Then they swirled up to Red Hook, and they went to Red Hook High School, and I believe they also went over to the Bertelsmann Campus Center at Bard. We had 4 polling places in Red Hook. And they interviewed folks. So that spooled out, and those stories came in to managing editor Jake Bernstein and to me late yesterday afternoon. We rushed, got them into the paper, as it were, and out for our 7 o'clock newsletter. Then we had a short break between 7 and 9 when polls closed, and we deployed 2 reporters. Claire Greenberger went down to Poughkeepsie to the Democratic Party watch party, and Eloise Goldsmith, who normally covers Rhinebeck, went to the Republican event. So we had 1 reporter in each place, and they talked to voters, they talked to Democratic and Republican committee members, they talked to party leaders, and they talked to candidates. And as the results were coming in, I was sitting in my couch in my living room with my very large screen open, looking at the results, which were refreshing in real time on a screen that I was looking at. The party leaders and the party watchers were watching those same screens at these events that I just described. And then we began to get input and comments as it became clear, for example, that Dan Aymar-Blair was going to win. That race was called about 10:50 last night. Gerry, same thing. So we were seeing precinct by precinct by precinct. There's 69 precincts in Dutchess County. We were seeing the results rolling in literally like every 2 or 3 at a time. And then I began to write. I began to put together 2 stories. I had one going on one side of my screen and another on the other side of my screen, one about the race in Red Hook and the other about all the other county races and the race in Rhinebeck. And as information was coming in, I would lay it down on my story, and then I would update it and move things around as I started to feel like I had themes emerging and we had certain kinds of quotes. And by I think 1 o'clock, 1 in the morning, I pushed out our Red Hook story to readers, and at about 2 o'clock, we pushed out our county story. So that was a night in the election world of the Daily Catch. And we've done this before. We've done it and we'll do it again. We've gotten very good at this kind of reporting. We know where to be. We know how to be there. We know what to ask. And we also know now we get audio clips because we have a podcast. And we get video clips because we want to do videos. So we try to do it all, and I hope our readers and our listeners really enjoy our coverage.
Well, thank you for all your hard work, and our readers did wake up to excellent coverage this morning. So
thank you.
This concludes our episode of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. If you like our broadcast, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform, and you'll be notified every time we drop a new show. Thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecilff for their help producing today's show. And thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. And a very special thanks to our sponsor, Edgewood Restaurant and Bar at Hutton Brickyards, where every season brings a new way to dine on the Hudson. Edgewood is now open for the season. For menus and reservations, visit huttonbrickyards.com. Emily, it's been a pleasure catching up with you today about all the election happenings.
Thanks so much, Walter, for being available to make this happen for us. And thanks to our partners at Radio Free Rhinecilff.